Yes, welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to talk about something that would have sounded impossible a few years ago. And what is that? The thing is that G7 quietly trying to mend its relationship with the BRICS countries. Now, if you remember, what G7 really was post Cold War era, what it was a political economic steering group that directly and indirectly basically controlled and shaped the global finance, trade rules, and then what energy flows is what actually uh, brought back, or say energy flow is what actually controlled the whole petrodollar system, right? And that's what created a petrodollar based world order. Now, but in last few years, if you notice, especially under current President Trump's administration, under this environment, that control has visibly weakened. And it had started in 2024, but I would say uh, from 2022 onwards, after the Russia Ukraine war started, right? On that, if you notice that the control has visibly weakened, right? So on one side there is BRICS, and BRICS linked demands are increasingly growing, okay? And this has been met by what? The suppliers like Russia, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Nigeria. So a oil-based bloc that G7 used to boast about, right? That thing is gone. Now BRICS has basically taken over the control of it. And what they're doing is that all that oil demand is being met by the BRICS countries itself. If you look into it, then who is supplying right now? Russia is supplying, Saudi Arabia is supplying, UAE is supplying, then Iran is there, then you have Nigeria is there, and lots of it is being done in the national currencies. Okay. Now, that's one aspect of it. Okay. Now, there is another aspect to it, and that is that on the other side, we see the G7 economies. If you look into it, G7 economies are drastically going downhill. In fact, they are making those decisions that are self sabotaging. For example, after Russia Ukraine war, when you know when you know that you have a hardcore energy dependency on who? On Russia, then why would you want to sanction Russia and immediately block all your energy dependencies without having a backup plan, right? So what they did after the Russia Ukraine war, they imposed sanctions on Russia, and Russia said that okay, bye, goodbye. And Russia, in fact, dumped the entire euro from its foreign exchange reserve. And the Russians were saying that okay, only way we will give you the natural gas is if you buy it in ruble. So there was a whole new thing started, and that did is that it actually killed the European Union's economy. Along with that, went down the G7 economy as well. Now, then few other things were happening around it, right? If you notice, now if you look into Canada during Justin Trudeau era, Canada's relationship with India were completely below at the rock bottom, right? And Justin Trudeau was making all those decisions that were completely, I would say, disastrous for Canada. And Canadian economy also went downhill. That's when it actually started. Now, all this is happening, and G7 economy is suffering. And BRICS has already uh, beaten, I would say, G7 in terms of PPP, in terms of commodity control, in terms of gold exchange, in terms of other aspects of things, the raw material and all that. Okay. So coming back to the current story, so why I'm talking about all this, right? So just recently, what happened is that actually before I get into that, let me tell you this. So now France is holding the G7 presidency for for the year 2026, and India is holding the BRICS presidency for year 2026. And what actually France is saying is that uh, the G7 should not become anti-BRICS alliance, and BRICS should not become anti-G7 alliance. Like if you look into the media, then you will see that there has been talks lots of times that, hey, there is a BRICS versus G7 comparison, BRICS versus this comparison, BRICS versus that G7 that comparison, right? All those things have been are there. All those comparisons are there. So what Emmanuel Macron is saying is that that should not happen, and there should not be the block politics, that this block is against that block and that block is against this block. Instead, blocks should work together to formulate their agendas, and there should be some common agendas within each block for uh, cohesive development. So, and he's saying that actually India could actually act as a bridge. India could help build a bridge between G7 and BRICS to reduce the fragmentation and stop all this, what you call it, stop all this block politics, and stop the world from splitting into two rival camps. Now, my question to all this is that, okay, it's all fair game. That's fine. You're right. Yeah, it should not be anti BRICS, and BRICS should not be anti G7 and this and that. Okay, fine. So, but the question is this: what does exactly bridge building actually mean in practice? I mean, right? He's saying bridge, bridge, bridge. Okay, so what are you talking about? G7 never talks about global South. So, what is G7 going to start talking about global South now? Or is global South going to talk about um, or about G7? What happened to all the colonial things, right? What happened to all that, right? So there are lots of questions into all this, right? And is this the sign? But that's another question. Is this a sign that G7 is losing coherence and heading towards a G6 scenario? Why? Because all the things, all the talk of anti BRICS, anti G7 thing, if you look into it, it was G7 who actually said that, hey, we that there should not be BRICS. It was the United States that said that, right? That there should not be any BRICS. We don't like BRICS and this and that. So the question really is that, what is Macron saying? Is he saying that G7 minus US, or is he saying that no, we now somehow we can do the damage control, let's work together, now we are buddies, we are brothers in arms and all that? What exactly is all that then, right? So the question is that, so does it mean that G7 is headed towards another split, that G7 is gonna become G6 minus US? Because the way economies are economics, the global economics is shaping up, right? The trade, the politics and everything else, it seems like that the US is saying that, hey, you are on your own, you bear your own burden, you figure out your own things. We are done playing your savior while you go and play buddies with the Russia, and we are done playing all these games that you guys have been playing. So what exactly is going on here, right? And if you look into it, if you look into the G7, for those who don't remember, G7 is what? G7 is made of what? United States, Canada, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now, if you look into the GDP and economy of these countries, United States barely moving forward. Okay, US GDP is, I think, the biggest fraud that has been put in front of the American public. Okay, the only productive GDP is basically 65% of the actual nominal GDP, which means that today actually the America's GDP is give take $19 trillion, 19 to $20 trillion. That's about it. So, and I have made a good video on it too, where I have calculated GDPs of how GDP actually works, what exactly GDP really is, all that. So just go and watch it actually. Then Canada, look at the Canada GDP. Canada GDP is not going anywhere. United Kingdom, probably UK's GDP actually for one point it was negative. Then after that, its growth started to be what, 3.9 0%, 3.0%. France, there is no growth in France GDP. Germany, practically negative GDP. Italy, no growth. Japan is basically going downhill as far as GDP is concerned. Not just GDP, actually, Japan's problem is that Japan has lost its military age population. Japan is the fastest aging country in the world. So what is all this? What exactly is going on? Is G7 really thinking of doing something like that? So let's talk about that, all this in this video. Okay, so please do like and subscribe, and let's get started. I'm gonna tell you, actually, this is not gonna be very long video or hour long or something. I will keep it under 30 minutes or so. But it's very important the way things have been said and the way things have been brought up and the way things are moving around. If you look at the leaders visiting India, leaders visiting China, everybody now, all of a sudden, everyone in Europe is talking about, oh, we should talk to Russia, right? All these games that are being played. So what exactly all this is, right? So is G7 really going to split again and become G6, right? These are the things that actually, that's what prompted me to make this video. Okay, this is the real geopolitics. So stay with me till then. Please do like and subscribe, and let's get started, and we will talk about all this that is going on around us. Okay, so now let me actually share my slide real quick. Okay, give me a second. All right. So, what exactly is going on? Right. So, first of all, this is the uh, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, his tweet last year in August. And I made a video on this too. So, and let's talk about this. First of all, he first talked about the BRICS in August last year. Okay. And I'll tell you this. First of all, for those who don't know, France had attempted to join BRICS as an observer in the year 2023, but it was simply rejected. Nobody really cared about it. And they said that no, we don't want that. That's what exactly happened. All right. Now let's look into this. So what he so this is the date, right here. Okay, August 21st, 2025. Okay, I made a video on this too, actually, and I predicted that something is coming as far as BRICS and G7 is concerned. All right. So what he's saying, I have spoken with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We coordinated our positions on war in Ukraine in order to move towards a just and lasting peace, with strong guarantees for Ukraine and Europe's security. All right. On trade issues, we agreed to strengthen our economic exchanges and our strategic partnership in all areas. This is the key to our sovereignty and independence. All right. Following up on the AI Action Summit held in Paris last February, we are working towards the success of AI Impact Summit to be held in New Delhi in 2026, which is going to be held in February 2026. So Emmanuel Macron will be there. Okay. Now, for more effective multilateralism, we agreed to work closely together in preparation for the French presidency of the G7 and the Indian presidency of BRICS in 2026. Work closely together. This was said last year. Now, some of you may be like, oh, God, he's going to talk about the old news. No, no, I'm not talking about the old news, actually. I'm going to talk about the new news. Okay. Now, what is the new news? New news is that this happened just a day ago. Okay, Emmanuel Macron, basically, he was delivering some speech in the ambassadors conference in Paris, France. Okay, so what he said over there is that Macron suddenly wants bridges with BRICS, warning against bloc politics. The president of French president argues the G7 should not be an anti-China club or anti-BRICS club, pointing to India's role as current BRICS president and saying New Delhi could help create bridges to curb global fragmentation. That's what he said. Okay. So, and this is what actually prompted me. I was like, okay, this guy is saying something, but the question really is that is he representing the entire G7? And then again, yes, France is holding the presidency and all that. That's fine, but uh, who is going to even listen to France? Does France even have that kind of pull in the G7? Like, for example, like last year when Canada hosted G7 summit, then US president one goes over there, stays there for 15, 20 minutes, give take, maybe an hour, I think. And then after that he just flies back. He didn't even value G7. So that tells me there's something is not right, right? And so President Emmanuel Macron is saying that, yeah, India should play a bridge and all that. Fine, fair enough. But then the question is that, is anybody going to listen to him? Does do other countries that are there, like for example US, Canada, Italy, Germany, Japan, do they agree with France's point of view? So the answer to that question is very simple. Answer is that yes, they do agree, except for US. Okay, so except for US, all those countries they all agree. Why? Because if you look into it, then you find, what are the countries I said earlier? The countries that are part of BRICS are, oh, sorry, G7 are basically US, Canada, and then you have uh, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Right now, out of this, India has already signed the free trade agreement with the United Kingdom. India was working on signing the free trade agreement with Canada, but something happened. Okay, then you have France. India and France are working towards a 114 Rafale jet deal. Then Germany is there. President Merz is actually heading to India pretty soon, and they're going to talk about certain things. Then Italy and India already have certain level of trade cooperation and all that. And then Japan the same way. So I don't see the problem with Japan. Only problem that we see as far as G7 is concerned is the US. Now, if G7 is the problem, let's say if US is the problem, so what G7 is planning to do about it, right? What exactly G7 is going to do about it? Is G7 going to going to cut off US and say that, hey, yeah, let's forget about US, let's do it ourselves? Because this talk has been there for quite some time, right? Then the question is how bridge will work in practice, right? So the bridge concept basically requires what? Number one thing it will require is the structured engagement, President Macron said to in his tweet earlier that that we will have to work together. So how that's going to happen? That's going to happen is that they will have to have some overlapping agendas. Okay, what do you mean by overlapping agendas? Overlapping agendas, as in that development finance, climate transition funding, then debt stress management, supply chain resilience. Now, if you look into it, India also has this year. India also has certain these type of agendas within the BRICS: that supply chain resilience, debt stress management, then climate transition, then development finance, and all that. Right now, if US doesn't agree, then would G7 still follow through on it, or G7 is just gonna go, oh, big boss is not agreeing, so let's forget about it? That's the most important question. And this is why I'm saying that I think that US will leave G7 too, because if US is not going to bother about European Union and US is going to secure all the oil and everything else that it needs to control the market, or basically to at least to become an oil cell exporting country or something, then G7 is not actually needed. Why? Because the things that uh, G7 was founded on, the basis of it, the basis are already gone. Okay, at this point, G7 is nothing but a money guzzler. It just takes money from the US, and all they do is just get together, have some photo sessions. That's about it. Okay, see, what was the problem with G7 was that earlier in the years, France has its colonies in Africa. Okay, France has its colonies in Africa. Petrodollar was on the peak. Then UK didn't have those internal problems. UK had some serious pull and grip in the Middle East, so they were controlling all these things. But as time went by, uh, the corruption, the overprinting, then your work of Russia and China in Africa, especially I would say that the work of China in Africa, in African continent, it basically killed the France's influence in that region, and then rest of whatever was left, Russians took care of it. So France is gone. Now, as soon as France left Africa, then G7's grip on the natural resources was gone. Whatever is in their own countries, that's it. But other than that, the cheaper natural resource, that grip is gone. They don't have that control anymore. Okay. Now, considering the climate wise, if you look into it, it's mostly cold climate, so they don't produce that much of a grain. Whatever they produce, uh, is mainly the dairy industry or the meat industry and all that. But grain wise, this is why if you notice, the eastern hemisphere is the highest producer of all this. Okay. So G7 lost the grip on oil also. Oil, gold, then they lost grip on the your semiconductors. They have lost grip on rare earths and all, right? The most important thing, they have lost grip. So now they don't know what to exactly do. Now when Emmanuel Macron actually makes these type of statements on behalf of G7, basically what he's doing is, at least this is my view, that he's saying that, hey, forget America. There are other countries, in other six countries in G7 too. So let's work with all these six countries as you guys already do, and let's not create this anti G7 blob politics and anti BRICS politics. Let's work together, and whoever joins our agenda and whoever works with us, they're most welcome to. If they don't work with us, so be it. That's what France is basically saying. Why? Now, some of you may be like, okay, oh, this is BS, that is BS. No, it shouldn't happen. But ground reality is this, guys. Okay, ground reality is that most of the BRICS countries, not just one or two, most of the BRICS countries already have very serious, very huge trade relationship with the European Union overall. And most of these European basically are G7 countries, if you look into it, right? They have great relationships together. Even China and Japan, they are the arch rivals, arch enemies, whatever you want to call it. Even they trade, they have serious trade relationship. Okay. So when all that is already there, it's already present, then what Macron is saying is that why don't we just work together and develop this thing further? And instead of trying trying to make some anti G7 block or something like that. That's what he's saying. Okay. Now, what he's saying that India should actually play the bridge in this whole thing. Now, is India going to play the bridge? Chances are that yes. Why? The combination that has come right now, that G7 is being hosted by France and BRICS is being hosted by India. And France and India have very tight relationship. They have no limit partnership actually. Okay, so this is a very good moment for G7 to actually put forward its point of view overall. And France is needing India's help. Now, I'm pretty sure that India is saying that, yeah, okay, we will do that. That's fine. And and I have looked into G7 agenda and BRICS agenda, and then there are certain overlaps in those agendas too. But the question really is, the way US has been interdicting all these oil tankers and all that, then what's the guarantee that other supply chains are going to be safe? G7 may be talking about resilient supply chains and all that, but what if US starts to use the proxies all over to disrupt the supply chains? Then what? Who is going to handle that? And if US wants to really sell the oil, now this is a very critical point, guys. Okay, I can tell you that Venezuela and whatever is happening is not just about the oil. Okay, there's a lot more to it, but that will require a whole another video, dedicated hour on that thing. Okay, but for now, you have to understand that the for US to interdict other oil tankers and all that, there is a game behind it too. what that game is that that this is a warning for other countries and their oil tankers that, hey, we are going to increase the risk, the shipping risk, the maritime risk. We are going to increase that risk, which means that when we increase the risk, then what's going to happen? The insurance cost is going to go up. Now, when insurance cost is going to go up, then how are you going to keep your oil prices low? And if insurance prices are going to go up, oil prices are going to go up too. Then at that point, when the global oil market, the overall oil prices are up, that's when the the US oil, the Brent, and then Venezuelan crude and all that will be that will become sellable in the global market. Right now, what's happening with the US oil market is that uh, it is seeing a bottleneck. Bottleneck is that they cannot sell it, but they keep producing it. Okay, the problem is that once you start the drill, you cannot stop it. Okay, because stopping it, that in itself will cost double the money. That's the problem. Okay, so once drilling starts, it continues, which means that if you're not selling the oil, then what's going to happen? You are going to get stuck into the oversupply of it. And that's the problem right now with the US market. Okay, that's why US is getting desperate when it comes to selling the oil. All right, that's what the whole problem is. Whatever you see at this time. Okay, so the idea behind it is that, okay, let's how do we actually increase the oil prices? Some of you will be like, oh, so what that has anything to do with increasing the oil prices? See, to understand this whole thing, you will have to understand how oil market works. Okay, how oil market works, how the oil pricing works. Oil pricing works like this. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction on this thing. Okay, and then oil pricing, I will talk about oil pricing in some other video. All right. So how oil pricing is work, that there is a term called break even point. Okay, for every country, for any oil producer country, the break even cost is basically different for each and every country. For example, Russians, for Russian Ural, actually the break even cost is around $10 to $15 per barrel. All right. But what Russians do is that actually the actual drilling cost is $10 to $15 per barrel. And because Russians actually take the oil export, it contributes to their GDP, so they take that into account too. What they're saying is that, hey, let's sell this much oil because that's how we want our GDP to be this much. Okay, so if we sell this much oil, then our GDP will be at this point. So that's why, and to do that, what they do, they have to set the final price, that is the break even price, to a certain point. Okay, so for example, for Russians, it comes down to break even comes down to probably 50, 55, around that, easy peasy. 50. In fact, I think that it is around 40s. It is in 40s or something. Same thing with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, the drilling cost actually costs $8 to $9 per barrel. Now you will be like, okay, so if it is $8 to $9 per barrel, then why do Saudis sell it at $80 per barrel? Saudis sell it at $80 per barrel because, once again, oil export contributes to their GDP. So they have to take that into account, that, hey, for how much price we should sell the oil in order for our GDP to be $2 trillion or $1 trillion, whatever, right? And when they do all that calculation, turns out that oil, they will have to sell the oil at $80 per barrel or $90 per barrel. So these have sold their oil at $90 per barrel too. But because of all the war and everything that's going on, and Russians selling their oil really, really cheap, so Saudis have to become very competitive. To become competitive, what they have to do is that they have to increase the supply of oil and find more customers to buy all that oil to make up for the lower cost. So they have to sell their oil at $80 or $70, like that, and so on and so forth. So their break even comes down to, say, 75 or $80. Okay. Then for Americans, the American Permian region, What happens over there is that uh, they have to do fracking. Okay, the oil from what fracking in nutshell. See, fracking. I'm not gonna talk about fracking as such, but the what happens when when actually fracking is needed. Fracking is needed when the oil is really really deep. Okay, when oil is really really deep, but at above the oil there are few other things, lighter products like lighter resources like water. Sorry, oil is lighter and water is heavier, right? So water is below it, and there's layers after layers, then it's under the rocks like that. Okay, point is, it's there is no straightforward way to take the oil out. So what do? You put the pressure on one side, you drill and you make a hole, and then what do is you put the pressurized water in there for the oil to come out. Okay, that's what you do. And as so what, oil keeps coming out until the pressure is there, and once the pressure goes down, the oil level goes down, right? That's the fracking. Now this is a very expensive process. Okay, and because of this, just the drilling cost of this whole thing cost actually 55 to $60 per barrel. And which means that the break even cost in the North American continent overall, whether it is Venezuela, whether it is US, whether it is Canada, okay, they all have the break even cost goes up to 65 to $70 per barrel. Meaning that, and this is, I'm just giving you the rough estimate. Actually, in certain cases, it goes up to 75 to $80 per barrel. All right, you will have to look into all this. But long story short, when this happens, so for US to be able, US companies to make profit off of selling the oil, that's only possible if the global oil market is high. Meaning that if global oil market is $90 per barrel or something, only then US drilling companies are going to make money from their oil that is present in the American continent. Okay, otherwise not. And that's where the problem is. The bottleneck is causing the oversupply, and they cannot sell that oil. All right. So anybody who was actually selling this BS of oh, now we have Venezuelan oil. This is why I said all along that Venezuelan oil has nothing to do with what happened in Venezuela. Okay, US companies have been there in Venezuela for a long time, and even though they talk about policy changes and this and that, but the reality is that why US companies cannot compete over there when Chinese companies are present. Simple thing is that you cannot compete because your currency, your system, your way of doing things is expensive. So you cannot bring down the cost. That's why Chevron was there, but Chevron wasn't drilling as much. All right. So that's the whole entire thing. Now, so the question really is that when you increase the risk, meaning that when you are going to hurt the supply chain, then how India is going to decide, India or other BRICS countries going to say that, hey, this is a resilient supply chain. What are these countries going to do about the resilient supply chain? Even though Emmanuel Macron said all these things, right? So how G7 is going to handle that, that's a whole different ball game. And if and US is not going to agree to, and chances are, the way I'm looking at it is that there will be proxies that will be used down the line. Okay, proxies will be used down the line to to interrupt and to disrupt other supply chains from other countries. That will be done. And this is why, if you look into it, then you find that actually India, Russia, China, they are all working together to make sure that these supply chains are secured properly, and there are no proxies anywhere. There is no way to introduce proxies anywhere. All right. So so why India is the bridge in this whole entire thing? So India occupies, what happens, India occupies basically a distinctive position, and it participates in BRICS, and while also maintaining a deep strategic, like we all know that. Okay, then if you look into it, India's BRICS presidency also provides a procedural channel through which agenda setting can be shaped in ways that do not prioritize confrontation with G7. And I have talked about that. There are some agenda overlaps. All right. And we talked about those agendas just now. So, and India talks about global south, and G7 never talks about global south. So, India can actually push G7 to talk about global south and their interests as well. So, so G7 can actually put some serious investments, and G7 can also look into removing the sanctions. Okay, because that is all. If you want, if you don't want, if G7 doesn't want any anti G7 type of rhetoric going on, then they will have to look into something like that, right? Because you cannot just go and weaponize your system and then expect BRICS not to be anti G7, right? So, so India also has what a strategic incentive to prevent binary global order, meaning that bipolar world order and all that, right? And this thing will basically what this is gonna uh, totally give control to each and every country. This is like the emergence of what a multipolar world order, right? And that's exactly what India is going to provide. Okay, now, and we talked about how bridge is going to work. They will have to work together, they will have to work and decide the agendas and all. The question really will be, what will be the agenda overall? Okay, but all in all, the question really is that how G7 is going to actually do the damage control that has been done so far, right? The Venezuela case, then Iran, things are going on in Iran, and US is constantly saying that we're gonna bomb Iran, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Iran is a big country, so what do you expect? So how G7 is planning to do the damage control? G7 as in minus US, right? So first objective will be to is to spill over containment, right? Whatever that there is, all that has to be prevention of the tariff shock, meaning that that means that countries that are heavily impacted by the tariffs and all that, so these countries are going to uh, work with Europe. This is why if you notice that India and Europe are very close to signing the free trade agreement, very close. Then German Chancellor is visiting India. French Emmanuel Macron is visiting India. They all are going to talk about trade deals, and they're going to sign lots and lots of trade deals over there, so that this whole entire thing, this spillover, can be contained. All right. The second objective is to what? So is supply chain rerouting. Supply chain rerouting meaning that um, that you have to have multiple routes to reach Europe. If Europe and BRICS countries, mostly the global South countries, they're going to work together, then they will have to come up with a supply chain that actually is resilient and that is not into the war zone all the time, right? And I think that G7 can actually do that very well. Now, if US is going to be the boss of Western Hemisphere, I don't know how much that's gonna play out and how what's gonna happen. But at least for now, at least for next 3 years, I would say that that's how it's gonna be. Okay, and but Europe cannot wait for next 3 years because Europe's economy is going downhill really, really fast. Okay, and then there is no guarantee after that the next president who will come is not going to do the same thing, right? So the fourth objective is basically if European G7 wants to really mend all the things and then want to do the damage control, is that alternative market access, meaning the deeper intra G7 coordination on procurement standards, alignment, sector specific arrangement, preserve export outlets, and all that they will have to do in order to make sure that there is no more further damage. They will have to work together on all these things, right? Now, is this the end of G7 though? Right? Is this the end of G7? I think that it's not gonna end G7 the way we think. I think what's gonna happen is like US directly announced that. Okay, just hear me out. Okay, the way US announced directly that they have left almost 60 plus UN organizations, UN affiliated groupings and whatnot. Like one of them is United Nations Human Rights Council and all that. right? They have left all that. Then there is a climate and all that mumbo jumbo too. So they have left all that group. So US is not going to, chances are that US is not going to announce that they are leaving G7 too, unless European Union does something fancy to run them off. But considering that uh, US doesn't have to put too much money into all this, so they may not leave G7. But I think that in America's eyes, G7 will become less and less relevant. All right. And this is why, if you notice, what US has done is that US has formed a new group called Park Silica. And in Park Silica, what they have done, they have included all the countries that can actually fund and somehow uh, add value to the semiconductor production. Like you have Japan, you have South Korea, you have UAE in it, you have US in there already, and I'll have to see if UK is there in it or not. But most important part is that Taiwan is not in it. All right, and Canada I think is there in it too. So some of these countries are there, but if you look into it, it's not all the G7 countries in it, right? So for US may not announce exit from G7 altogether or dumping G7 altogether unless there is some serious thing going on, right? But I think what's going to happen is that US, just like President Trump last year, he just attended it for a couple of hours and then he left. I think that for next 3 years or so, that's what we are going to see. That US will attend G7 meetings as a formality, and then they're gonna leave. Or sometimes they may not even attend. Probably they may say send Secretary of State to somebody else to go and just visit and do the formality and get out. But US is not going to be there to decide the agenda or something else, especially if if France and other countries are going to insist on working with the BRICS, because working with BRICS meaning that you are making BRICS stronger, and if you're making BRICS stronger, then in President Trump's eyes, or you can say that in the US eyes or the American eyes, you are the enemy. Now, if you are the enemy, then how enemy and two enemies can be in the same grouping called G7? So all that has to be seen, and I think this year we are gonna figure out, or say more so, say more or less, say we will find out if G7 is gonna be G7 or is gonna become G6. All right, so that's all for this video, guys, and please do like and subscribe. I hope you learned something, and I will talk to you guys in another video. Take care.